Hello and welcome to your go-to Detroit Pistons podcast, The Pistons Pulse, co-hosted by me, Bryce Simon of Motor City Hoops, a former D1 Hooper and current teacher, husband, and father of 3 amazing kids.
And I'm Omari for the second Pistons beat writer for the Detroit Free Press.
And since he's with us right here, we'll let Wes Davenport introduce himself.
And I'm Wes Davenport. I produce the Pistons Pulse podcast and I host the Pin Down over at Detroit Bad Boy.
I should have let you know so that way you could have your mute. Wes was a pro there, though. Most guys would have started talking, freaked out a little bit, got uncomfortable, and just talked through the mute button, but not Wes. He knows what he's doing. And we have another pro here, a guy I've known for a minute. Stephen Gillaspie does all things NBA draft over at No Ceilings. He's one of the best. Again, I've known him for a couple years now. Stephen, welcome to the Pistons Pulse. I believe welcome back to the Pistons Pulse. I believe we did something along these lines with you last year as well. I know we had you on, so welcome back. Welcome back to the States. I know you've been out on service for a little while, so let everybody know who you are, what you're doing, and welcome to the Pistons Pulse.
Well, first off, Bryce, man, thanks for having me. Omari Wes, it's good to see you again. For those who might not remember or didn't listen, this is my return to Pistons Pulse. So very proud to be here, very excited. For those who don't know, I do some scouting and stuff like that for No Ceilings. It's a platform where we cover the NBA draft all year round. We have multiple, kind of different venues in which we do that. We have the website, we have a podcast, we have YouTube video on all of that. And Bryce, man, similar to you, when I'm not watching basketball videos, I am 4 kids, active duty military right now. So I like to keep my world as busy and chaotic as I possibly can. I even have a dog and a hamster too. So
you got me beat there, Stephen, because we do not allow animals right now in our house with the kids and everything else that's going on. So guys, we're doing a mock draft on this episode. So it's not going to be completely Piston specific, but everything that's going to happen in this draft until maybe the last few picks, it's going to matter to Detroit. We're going to talk about prospects you guys need to know. Obviously, we'll make a selection for the Pistons, really settle in on that one. So we'll pick 1 through 16. I know that's 2 picks past the lottery, but there's 4 of us divided, just divisible with 16 there. Like I said, we'll settle and talk around number 5. All of these guys are players you should be familiar with. Either they'll be available at 5, or I know some people have talked about trading back. And I will say we purposely gave Steven number 1 to lead off the show so that he could also select at number 5 to differ. You guys have listened to me and Omari. Hopefully you've been listening to Wes on the pin down about the pick at number 5. So Omari, you got anything before we get started here? Steven's going to be on the clock once we get going.
No, I've got nothing. I wish I had a head of basketball operations update, but we're all just waiting to see what happens.
I wasn't even going to ask Omari. I wasn't going to do it.
But that's what everybody was thinking, though. That's what everybody was thinking. I already knew. So I just went on ahead and got ahead of it. No updates. Maybe next week. We'll see. Still sounds like they are in the back half of this process, so we'll just see where it goes.
And if you're watching live, first, rate, subscribe, like, all of that stuff, and then drop your comments in the chat and let us know what you think about our picks. And even if you don't like them or don't agree with them, put them in there. We'll put them up on the screen. We'll talk about it. But with that said, Stephen, you are up at number 1, the surprise of the lottery, the Atlanta Hawks jumping from number 10 all the way to number 1. Lead us off here with the Atlanta Hawks.
yeah, it was wild, man, to hear that Atlanta was going to get the number 1 pick. And I think that, this, Bryce, we talked about this draft, all year round, and there's different thought processes behind it and things like that. But the beautiful thing for Atlanta is that they have their star. They have a number of different ways that they can go with said star. And
which star are you talking about? Just to be clear, which one is going to get traded is what I want to know.
Well, I mean, that's a whole different kind of pool to dive into. I was referring to Trae Young. DeJounte Murray is another guard there that could have some staying power. But with that being said, I feel like that kind of solidified the number 1 pick for me. And this draft hasn't been particularly strong at the top. But with Atlanta landing the number 1 pick, I'm just going to keep things simple. It's not, sexy in terms of injecting new life into the draft community, but Alex Sarr out of the NBL, he's a player that we've been familiar with for a while. I was blessed to watch him at OTE the year before whenever he was playing with him in Asar Thompson. It was really weird because whenever we watched him play during the OTE Combine, afterwards we had a chance to interview players, and no one talked to Alex Sarr. I was the only one who legitimately asked him a question, and it was about him being so perimeter oriented on the offensive end. And he talked about how he wanted to get better on the interior. He wanted to be a better defender. And I think, going to the NBL was a good call for him, because that's such a tough league, as you guys already know. And that's where, like a pressure cooker, you put a young kid in that league, he comes out as a refined man and he's ready to go in the NBA. I think he kind of fits a little bit of what the needs are in Atlanta. Now, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that they do have a couple of big men already on their roster. Atlanta's in such a weird spot because they have names all over their roster, right? But they just can't piece it together. What we have seen in these NBA playoffs, though, is that you have this kind of like positional archetype for like these rangy, lanky, slight of frame, pretty mobile big men. And a lot of teams are succeeding with this player type. So I think that with the recent success that we've seen with like your Evan Mobley's, who had like a little bit of an evolution within these playoffs, your Chet Holmgrens, Victor Wembanyama is going to be, potential face of the league for years to come. I think Alex Sarr benefits from a lot of that hype and production that Victor Wembanyama had. And obviously the playoff success of like Mobley and Holmgren does him a lot of help as well.
Yeah, I agree. I love the archetype. Sarr's probably the one player we're not going to talk too much about. All right, got to give my kid a shout out. Brian is one of my students, 8th grade promotion, just graduated 8th grade, turning into the summer. So yeah, there he goes. First day out of school, my guy. Appreciate you tuning in. Some of my students do know what I do. So, but yeah, I don't think we need to talk too much about Sarr, because I think out of all of these guys, he's probably the guy that has no chance of getting to 5. I think if for some reason Atlanta doesn't take him at 1, the Wizards jump all over it at 2. So Omari,
I would.
Yeah. Omari, Wes, any thoughts on Stephen taking Sarr for number 1 for the Hawks? Any direction you would have went otherwise, or are we all good with this?
No, like I like Sarr. I would say I feel like I'm more afraid of like his lack of rebounding and just overall physicality than maybe I was previously. But I still I've compared him to Jaren Jackson Jr., which would require him to shoot a little bit better. But I do think he's a great modern forward, and I would probably take him, if not at 1, then absolutely number 2 for any team.
Apparently my students are now spamming the entire chat, and they're going to get mad if I don't shout them out. So shout out Noe, shout out Daisy, all of you guys. Go be kids. You don't want to listen to us talk about the NBA draft. Wes, any thoughts on Alex Sarr to the Hawks? Any critiques there? Are you good with that?
No, that's what I would do. I think he's the number 1 player in the draft, so it makes sense to have him go number 1.
All right, let's keep this moving. Mari, that means you said, if Sarr would drop, you would definitely take him at number 2 for the Wizards. What are your thoughts here? Number 2 overall, Washington Wizards. You got another big on the board. You got some point guards. You got some wings. Where are you going with this one?
Yeah, I'm also going to go with a big. I'm going to go Donovan Clingan.
I like it. Okay.
I am a big fan of his game. I feel like he's a bit divisive just because he's a really big 7'2" center who doesn't switch and doesn't shoot, but just his closest comparisons like Rudy Gobert. But I also think he catches the ball a bit better than Rudy Gobert. I think he has a little bit more of a post game. Probably worse at the line. I know he shot like 51 or something in the 50s last season. So that's the one drawback with him. He can really pass it, lob threat. It's got a couple post moves. He just has a lot that you want in a modern big. And anytime you can take a guy that can realistically be your starting center for the next decade, I think you go for it. So that really stabilizes things for the Wizards at the center position and gives them a guy that they can build around to an extent, right? You can get your guard somewhere, but surround him with shooters, and you should have a pretty good team.
Stephen, give us your thoughts on Donovan Clingan, just in general, not necessarily to the Wizards here, but again, this is a name that all of a sudden has popped up for Detroit Pistons fans at number 5. So what are your thoughts there on him? And maybe if you want to give it a little Pistons, flavor with that, give us that as well.
Yeah, so I have Donovan 4th on my board, and I think that it's reasonable. I've seen plenty of mocks that have him going this high. There's even once upon a time was why don't we consider Donovan Clingan the number 1 pick in this year's draft, right? He's a proven winner. Multiple years he's shown that he can play ahead of and behind other big men, which I think that NBA teams, they see that. NBA teams love to throw a bullpen unless you have like a Joel Embiid or Nikola Jokic. You have this rotation of big men that you employ. Even really good big men have, a steady presence behind them, things like that. I mean, what we were seeing in Minnesota with Rudy Gobert, you got Naz Reid that you can bring in and just an injection of life, right? So Klingon, I feel like, has a very safe floor. I think that he could be a very steady NBA presence for a long time. There's a lot of people that buy the shooting. I've seen a lot of combine videos of him in just an open court, just hitting a bunch of jumpers. So if you're buying the jump shot, there could be even a little bit more upside there. But I think that, he measured well. I believe he was around like 280 pounds, right? So great frame, already entering in the NBA. That's what you want to see. We saw, people bring up the playing time concept. Again, yeah, I doubt that Washington or any team, right, even if Detroit brings him in, works out great, especially for Detroit, right, because you have Jalen Duren. So you have this young, youthful, monster at the big man position, right, that you could employ. But for Washington, you need a big man presence. You saw them make trades at the deadline that pretty much gutted that whole, position group. So I definitely understand the pick. And I think that if you don't buy the star power in this draft, Klingon probably has one of the most easy to project elongated NBA career. So I can't fault anybody at all for wanting to take him within that top 3 range.
All right, Wes, you're up at number 3 with the Houston Rockets in like what I think is one of the tougher spots. You may not think so. This Rockets team is really talented and has a ton of young talent kind of all over the board. So I'm always fascinated when they come up because I see people go all sorts of places with it. So where are you going to go for the Rockets at number 3?
Yeah, it's kind of tough. Like you said, they're very talented, and I think when you've just got talent across the board, it's never a bad idea to take a really good 3-and-D wing. So I'm going to go Zachary Risachet here for the Rockets. Maybe add some Cam Whitmore insurance if you want to think of it that way. But, at a minimum, guy who's going to come and shoot, play defense pretty well. And, maybe there's some ceiling on top of that as well. Kind of a rich get richer, I guess, for the Rockets.
MB Well says, yeah, trade here, guys, book it. This is definitely one I think a lot of people will be looking at as potential. There's a couple other those we'll talk about a little bit later. Stephen, Zachary Risachet is a guy that Pistons fans are very interested in. Like when we were talking about them potentially having the number 1 pick, there was a lot of Risachet talk. Where are you at on Risachet? Because there's been number 1 overall pick talk. There's been number 10 overall pick talk with this kid. Just came off a huge game. Where are you at with him?
I have him 5th on my board right now, so you could definitely you best believe that he was on my short list for Detroit when my next pick is coming up.
Yeah,
I understand his fit pretty much anywhere, and I think that a lot of people made a huge to-do about his shooting percentages and how streaky he was. And I think people look at the European or NBL production through the college basketball lens.
Sure.
And I think you do yourself a lot of disservice in doing that because they play a professional schedule and they have significantly more games, right? So what he was able to sustain over a longer period of time and play for that, number of games, I think that speaks to the durability. And that's something that people really aren't really discussing with his game either is, just how consistent he was, playing in France. But I actually like the fit in Houston because a lot of people are kind of potentially looking at ball handlers. And I don't know what that does if you inject, another ball handler, a guy who might need a higher usage to make that pick more worth it. Risachet fits a team that has a lot of facilitators on it already. And he's another defender. And I think Ime Udoka would love to have a guy as rangy as him who can space the floor and make life easier for these guys that want to get downhill.
Yeah, I'm always a little surprised whenever people put ball handlers with Houston when you figure how much the ball is in Şengün's hands. Amin Thompson hopefully eventually does some of that. Fred's still there, those type of things. So I'll keep it moving here. The Spurs with the first of those picks, this is gonna make it interesting because a lot of the mocks I've done, Topic is off the board when the Spurs come up. So lots of times here I take a wing and then I take Dillingham at 8. That's not what I'm going to do here. I'm going to take Nikola Topic here at number 4 for the San Antonio Spurs. We don't have to spend a lot of time on him, Stephen, because I don't know that there's a big Pistons push, with this. I mean, I guess if he falls to 5, there's a conversation to be had. What do you think about Nikola Topic? Kind of give us what your thoughts are with him with the Spurs and then just him in general.
Yeah, so on my big board, not a mock draft, but on my big board, he's actually my top prospect.
I love it.
And And if he would have fell to Pistons, Pistons fan would have gone out. I would, 100%. You figure it out later. I mean, like there are multiple teams that have multiple ball handlers, but we don't got to talk about that now. What this does for San Antonio, though, in particular, you have someone who can handle the ball. He's got great positional size. He's versatile. He showed, when he got caught up in his league that he could play off the ball as well, which was very handy. But I buy him more as like a lead creator. And I think that there's another player. This is kind of a theme in this draft class, is like big to do about shooting and percentages. I actually did for No Ceilings a piece on shooting percentages. And if a guy is taken number 1 overall, like odds are the shooting comes along to at least league average by like year 3 to 5 based on the last number 1 picks that have been had over the past, since 2013. They average out, like NBA teams actually do a good job of developing shooting for like the best players within these classes, right? So I believe that Topic, who is also a really good 3-point shooter and has great touch indicators literally everywhere else along the floor, I believe that he can grow into a shooter. But what this does is it has someone set the table for Victor Wembanyama, who a lot of people are really big on him being like a do-it-all, like literally does everything on the basketball court. But what we see big men succeed the most is when they have someone who can set the table for them. So I'm all for San Antonio getting someone who can be a good table setter. And if nothing else that we saw from Topic this season, he's a wizard with the basketball in his hand. So I love that fit.
All right, just a quick recap. Hawks have Alex Sarr, Wizards, Donovan Clingan, Rockets, Zachary Risache, Spurs, Nikola Topic. Before we get Steven's pick, Omari, I just want to get your thoughts on where the board has fallen for the Pistons with those guys off. The guys, best players available will be Ron Holland, Steph Castle, Dalton Knecht, Reed Shepherd, Rob Dillingham, Cody Williams, if you're into that. Where are you at with how the board has fallen, Omari? Where would you go with this pick before we get Stevens?
I would say Reed Shepherd. Like I've also been open just about how much I like him as a player. I think he could realistically be the best talent available at 5, just with how ridiculous he shot the ball. But I mean, he doesn't really have a lot of holes in his game other than the fact that he's 6'1". But I think he's a great fit next to Cade. I think that secures your backcourt for years to come. And I just really like him as a player. So that's the way I would go.
Wes, same question to you. Where are you at as the board sits right now?
To be different, why don't I say Dalton Knecht? Pretty seamless fit with Cade Cunningham, scorer, shooter, and, maybe not the greatest defender, but definitely helps with the floor spacing and could probably play right away since he's a little older.
Wes, you had a question for Steven about Cade and Topic, and I think this is kind of a bigger question in general. It doesn't have to just be Topic, so go ahead. I'll let you ask, because I know this is one you and I have talked about quite a bit.
Yeah, I was going to say, Bryce, obviously you and I have talked about it a lot, but Steven, for you, what would be the fit there with Nikola Topic and Cade Cunningham, both kind of being lead ball handlers? Would that be an issue? Could they work it out? Where do you think that could go in the long run?
I mean, to me, that comes down to personality and player types. We've seen CJ McCollum and Dame Lillard in Cleveland. We've seen, Donovan Mitchell and Garland, but on the opposite side, we have Luka and Kyrie playing beautiful basketball together in Dallas right now. Granted, Luka is like high volume, kind of league average 3-point shooter. Kyrie can cook like no other. I think Cade has done a fantastic job of growing as a shooter. He's another one of these examples of a player who, one, he had fantastic shooting percentages in college before he came in, and it's taken him a while to get to league average. I think that, now he's like at that league average and trending upwards as a shooter, showing that he can do a little bit off ball. I'm not saying you draft Tokic to push Cade off the ball, but I think that they both could play well together. And what you can do is you have one set up like a strong side action, get the defense engaged, kick the ball to another terrific ball handler with great passing vision. And the next thing you know, you have a scrambling defense trying to play off of both of them. And both could finish, both could set up, a cutting big man or a wing player. So I think that a good creative coach could get the best out of both of them being on the court together.
All right, we are going to go to a short break here. And when we come back, Steven, you will be on the clock with the Detroit Pistons.
All right, we are back with segment 2, and we're going to lead off with Steven's pick for the Detroit Pistons.
Guys, I hate the way this sport has fallen because I am stuck, and I know that y'all are saying Reed Shepherd would be your ideal fit, and then we got a Dalton Connect vote. These are players 8 and 9 on my board. Now, Bryce knows, I text Bryce all the time. Players like 4 and 5 through like 12, super interchangeable for me. Right. So, and I don't think that whoever Detroit is drafting, that you're looking for a franchise changing player. Right. So I think that if it were me, the third best player on my board right now is, or not right now, just in general, is Stephon Castle.
Sure.
Right. I would go best player available. And there's like been a big to do on draft Twitter right now on, is he a point guard? Is he not? If he gets drafted to Detroit, you don't got to worry about that, right? So that question's kind of null and void. Now, what this does do is that you get someone who is proven winner already, young player, right? Plays great defense, like outstanding perimeter defense, very versatile, smart player who has huge scoring upside, like fantastic off of the ball, shows great strong cutting, has worked in a system that's a lot of actions. You have to be very sound to succeed in a UConn offensive system. And he's great cutting, great passing, great rebounding, great defender. The shooting is the big question mark. And I know that Detroit fans probably aren't excited to have someone who's not projected to be a great shooter on their team. I see in the comments, Don't Connect. I love Don't Connect. Like, Don't Connect could easily go top 5 and I would believe it. I just think that you want to get someone who can contribute and who has the best upside possible. I love Dalton, but I don't imagine that he's going to get significantly better year 7 than he is year 1. Whereas Stephon Castle, you have huge upside potential with him growing into potentially like a secondary, tertiary creator, a dog on the defensive end, and just does literally everything else on the floor that you would want. That's what I would do.
Team Savant says trade back. And listen, guys, like obviously that something like that is on the table, or drafting this is a part of a bigger deal you're going to make after. Like, we just aren't doing that right now. Like, again, Wes and Omari and I are actually in one that's going to drop on the basketball bulletin in a week. And I will tell you this, I won't spoil it, but Omari traded the number 5 pick. So I just want you guys to know, like, we are thinking and talking about these things, but for this exercise, we're forcing Steven to make the selection. It's a tough spot, man, because
it is.
Like, at the end of the day, Steph Castle is the best player on my board as well, or it'd be him or Ron Holland. I don't know if either of those guys shoot it well, but Steph Castle, I think what he does off of Cade is he takes that primary perimeter matchup, which is something that this team needs. He can do some of the playmaking and primary ball handling in a second unit or on the second side. It's just like, can he shoot or not? And I have real concerns about it, but that's not me critiquing the pick. I'm just, can Connect play defense? Can Reed Shepherd guard at the point of the attack? How is he going to hold up at his size? Like, all of these guys are going to have some questions. So I don't mind this. I've actually warmed up to this a little bit more than I would have a month ago. At the end of the day, the Pistons are probably going to have to do something with their young group, either not play them together or move on from a couple, because they're already have an issue of floor spacing with the ones they have, with Duran being a complete non-shooter, Asar being a complete non-shooter, and Ivy being a not great shooter at the very least. So, Omari, Steph Castle, thoughts, this pick? I know maybe you have gone different, but I don't think you're like a anti-Steph Castle fan.
No, I like Steph Castle a lot. He does a lot you would want from an off guard. He's got great size. He's about 6'7", like long wingspan. Really, really great shooter. Can handle the ball a little bit, can pass a little bit, and he can really get downhill. So there's a lot about him I like as a player. I don't know if he fits with Cade. I actually talked to him at the combine last week, and we talked about his shooting. And I'm sure some of you guys saw the video I put on Twitter, but he was very confident that he could shoot. He said he shot the ball well when he was younger, and he just didn't feel like his stats last year represented where he's at as a shooter now. But I know that there are some mechanical stuff people have concerns about, and that remains to be seen. I like Steph Castle as a player. I think he could absolutely be a top 5 guy in this draft. for the Pistons, I really cannot stomach drafting another guy that can't shoot. And that's really the only knock against Castle, that 5.
I get that it's probably not going to be like a popular pick, right? Like, I totally understand that. But again, like, Detroit's not drafting a savior at 5, right? Like, that's just the way that it's going to be. I'm going best player available, winning mentality, winning attitude, sacrifice think about what he did at going to UConn. Like, he could have gone to any other, D1 program and just dominated on the ball, right? Like, to me, that says a lot about the character of the young man.
Yeah. And listen, at the end of the day, I think the number 5 pick is going to be taken with a bigger picture in mind, especially for the Pistons. If you're keeping Duren, Asar, and Ivy, you probably can't take Steph Castle. Like, if you truly think that that's your long-term future, then you have to take Connect or Reed Shepherd or somebody that spaces the floor. Hopefully, we haven't even talked about Montas Zealous, who I'm a little bit lower on and have continued to drop a little bit.
Same.
So I don't have him as much in play at 5 as I did even a few weeks ago. But we don't know those answers. Maybe Detroit, maybe the front office isn't sold on all those guys, or maybe those guys coming off the bench, that type of stuff. I do want to ask you real quick, Stephen, before we start to move on.
Sure.
We can go through the rest of the picks a little bit faster here. Obviously, we wanted to settle in here. With Steph, do you think he's a point guard? Because I'll be honest, I didn't like hearing him say that I'm a point guard and that's what he wanted to be, because I think his best value actually comes off the ball, second side creator, second unit point guard, those type of things. But I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong there. I know that was what he was going to be coming out of high school, so maybe he should.
There's a lot of gamesmanship when it comes to what you say in the combine, right?
Yeah.
So when I don't think that someone looks at Steph Castle's UConn season and says that's the guy that I want, like, handling the lion's share of the load, right? But what I do believe is, like, he could grow into being like I don't think a Chris Middleton level ball handler outcome is out of the question, former Detroit Piston right there, right? I actually just talked about this with Maxwell, right? Is that, sure, he's not like a elite ball handler, but I think that it's in the realm of possibility, like the stuff that he's been able to show at UConn and the stuff he showed at high school, like a secondary, tertiary creator, I don't think is out of the realm of possibility at all. Like, he took good care of the ball. He showed good passing vision at UConn. I think that he can play within the flow of an offense really well. I wouldn't consider him a point guard, but I don't not like him being confident in himself either.
So Rod Love 313 says, I just can't stomach non-defensive team perimeter and in the paint. Like, Steph Castle, to me, may be the best perimeter defender at the top of the class. Not overall, but at the top of the class. I mean, if you just want straight up defense, we should probably talk about Ryan Dunn, but Steph Castle can really, really guard. Wes, I know you have a question, and then we will move on and we'll get Omari's pick with the Hornets at 6.
Yeah, Stephen, I just wanted to ask you quickly, because you mentioned the scoring upside, and I've heard a lot of Fon Castle talk on, the soft skills, the playmaking, the defense, the finishing, but not as much on his upside as a scorer. So I was just wondering if you could expand on that a little bit for me and also the listeners.
Yeah, sure. And I think it has to do with the ball skill that he did show in a limited role. I mean, when you look at the ball handling usage percentage and where it went, Tristan Newton, Cam Spencer, obviously on the ball a lot. They look to go to Donovan McClingan. But again, just looking at the possessions in which Steph Castle did create with the ball in his hands, there was a lot to be encouraged about. The film that we saw in high school, there was a lot to be encouraged about. I don't think that he's like dribbling off of his feet, like how a lot of people are talking about him. It's like, people operate on level 1 or 10 and they don't acknowledge like the 2 through 9 in between. You know what I mean? Like, I think that he's got good enough ball handling and he's got upside to where he could catch people off guard on the dribble on a mid-range pull-up. He can snake his way into the lane, and he's plenty strong enough, I think, too, to like finish through contact on the line. He still has a little bit to go, but I think, Bryce, you could probably talk about this a little bit, as like a D1 athlete, right? Like he's got the frame, I think, that where he can put on like some very functional, strong, weight. And the thing that people don't talk enough about in the draft community is like strength is such an important aspect of being able to play basketball. And I think Steph is already like very well strong enough, like as a young man. Once he starts putting on his NBA weight, like this guy is going to be able to bully people. And he's already got that mentality that I'm going to get to my spots, right? So I think projecting that out, I think that he does have like some scoring ability because he can cut, because he can set screens and slip a screen and run off, that he's very sharp on these shallow cuts or, rubs off of clinging. There's a lot of actions that UConn ran to which he just finished and like showed such an understanding of like where he can get to his spots. Once he gets stronger, he's really going to be able to bully people. And I think that that's going to come in a couple seasons.
Yeah, I think what I came away impressed with this year is I thought he really understood kind of off-ball movement, cutting, offensive rebounding, all the things you're talking about. So this has been good because Steph Castle, I don't know, is a guy that we've really honed in on throughout all of our NBA draft talk. So Amari, we'll talk about these other guys as we go through. Amari, you're up at number 6 with the Charlotte Hornets.
Yeah, we have about 30 minutes for the last 10 picks, but we're past the Pistons now, so we can probably go a little bit more rapid fire. I already waxed poetic about Reed Shepherd. He's still my pick on number 6 for the Hornets for pretty much the same reasons. I love his fit next to LaMelo Ball, just another guy that can really, really shoot it, can handle it, solid passer, could really defend, and would like within the scheme. I know that there's some questions about his maneuverability along the perimeter and like just one-on-one, but I do think he's a smart defender. And he has great hands. I mean, to average almost a full block at his size is absolutely insane. And he was around, I think, 2.5 steals. Like, there's just so much stuff that pops about him statistically that I just can't imagine that he's not going to be at least an above average starter for a long time. I don't know if he has a star ceiling, but I feel pretty good about him being a long-time starter.
Yeah, I mean, I think Shepard's really intriguing there. Put him between LaMelo Ball and Brandon Miller, and there's a lot of floor spacing. That's going to be tough to guard. I know YouTube user says terrible backcourt defense there. Like, I think that's a little bit more LaMelo Ball than Reed. Like, I think Reed's going to end up an average defender, a neutral defender. I don't think he's going to be a terrible defender because he is going to be competitive. He's going to have active hands. He showed at the combine how athletic he was, those type of things. But he is going to be small and struggle at times at the point of the attack. Stephen, I have 2 questions about Reed Shepherd real quick.
Sure. How
much do you think he can play on the ball in the NBA? And what do you think about the defense, specifically at the point of attack?
I think he's a one-position defender,
Okay.
6'3".
Yeah.
Pretty average wingspan, right? Like, nothing to write home about wingspan-wise, right? I think on the ball is where I would want to see him the most. I don't imagine him doing a lot of off-ball stuff. So to me, in the NBA, Reed is probably like a good 1. You know what I mean? Like a good, strong 1. Maybe even a backup 1 maybe in the immediate, but I think that he could grow, to Amari's point, I think he could grow into a starter. I have questions about Reed myself, and it's hard to look at the shooting percentages and be like, you know what, like that's not good. You know what I mean? Yeah. But a lot of the stuff that he showed, I think that he is going to be like a real strong 1 in the NBA.
All right, Wes, you are up at number 7 with the Blazers. Please take Tinjon Saloon to make whoever happy that called you out earlier.
I've been thinking about just forcing it here to make YouTube user happy, but I think that the Blazers might be better served to get an actual, 2-3 kind of more wingy player, or Salon maybe more of a 3-4 or 4-3. So how about Ron Holland here? Take the big upside swing for the Blazers. They've got Scoot, high upside, right? Ron Holland might have one of the higher upsides in the whole class. You're going to get him at 7. And they've got a hole there at the 3. So I like the fit.
Real quick sidebar. I love that we're at the point in our podcast where our listeners are making jokes about us after previous episodes. So Matthew says, shout out from Brazil. And Cashflow says, man, you're up really late. Ha, because for anybody who didn't listen last week, Cashflow's messing with Amari whenever he talked about the time change and all of that before realizing that Brazil is kind of directly south of where we all are, and the time isn't.
You have some time zone experts in here, clearly.
No, listen, that you're in a good spot with the pod whenever you have people making those jokes in the comments about that type of stuff. So we appreciate you. YouTube user says he likes your pick here, Wes. Ron Holland, Steven, I think he's a little, I don't want to say he's polarizing, but some people see real upside, some people don't. Some people hate the feel. There's some real defensive upside in terms of is it going to be solid or is it going to be frenetic? What are your thoughts on Ron Holland?
Ron is an interesting player for me. I have him 10th on my board.
Okay.
And I know that people are significantly higher, but again, going back to the point I made earlier, 4 or 5 to 12 to 14, very flat range, right? I think that Ron does have tremendous upside. We see these hyper athletic players succeed in the NBA, right? Like if you take an athlete, like more times than not, like who is strong, who's fast, who runs the floor like Ron does, you have a path to success with a player like that. Now, he does have the handle. He likes to operate with the ball a lot. I'm interested to see what that looks like in an NBA context, because he didn't really do less with the ball, like in a role. And it's kind of like the antithesis, of what we saw with Steph Castle this year, where like Steph could have did the same thing as Ron, right? Ron could have done something different. And I think the way that the G League is ran, like obviously there's a reason why the program is about to no longer exist, right? Like they kind of failed these young men and a lot of the young men before them, right? But what Ron does have, I think he has higher offensive upside to me, Bryce, than defense.
Okay.
I know a lot of people think that he's like one of the best defenders in this class. I have questions on there. I think the fundamentals leave a lot to be desired, but I don't know how much of it was like the pickup style of basketball that the G League does kind of have, right? But I do love the potential that he does have. The shooting concerns are very real with him, as they are with a lot of prospects. So if you're putting everyone on even playing field in terms of shooting, I could understand betting on the athleticism and the upside with him.
I'm with you on the defense in terms of like, I don't know that the foundational fundamentals are there, but he plays really hard. He does some exciting things. And like, I'll be honest, that's what I was saying about Asar and Amin Thompson last year coming out of OTE. And you know, both of those guys ended up being pretty good defenders, even as rookies. So I am up at
matter.
Yes, I am up at, obviously Ron, not the same level of athlete as those guys. That's a huge part of it. I'm up at number 8 with the Spurs. For the second time, I took Nikola Topic with the first pick here. I'm actually just going to go Dalton Knecht at this point. He is the best player available on my board. And every time I write up a little thing about the Spurs, whenever there's a mock draft, I say, you always want to add more floor spacing around Victor Wembanyama. And at the end of the day, there are defensive concerns with Dalton Knecht. If there's a guy to make up for those, you know, Victor is a guy that can do that. So it's the same argument as Rob Dillingham when people mock Rob Dillingham to the Spurs. I'm not going to take Dillingham after taking Topic, so I'll take Dalton Knecht. Here, before we go to break, Stephen, just give us your thoughts on Knecht to the Spurs, Knecht in general. There's a lot, I'll tell you right now, there's a lot of Pistons fans that either want Knecht at 5 or want to see the Pistons fans, you know, Pistons trade back and take him a little bit later. What are your thoughts on Knecht and him ending up with Detroit?
I love Knecht. I wrote about him earlier on in this process. You know, obviously the shooting is going to be what everyone does, because let's just be honest, like he's a white dude, right? Like he's going to get connected as just you see what I did there? He's going to be connected as just a shooter. But I love the scoring. Like you're talking about a guy who had over 20 dunks for consecutive seasons. Like this dude is a legit athlete, right? And he is not afraid to mix it up in the paint. And in the one season where he committed to defense, right? He showed great improvement, right? And if you look at Tennessee, you have to be a good defender to play within that program, right? Or at least net neutral. And I would venture to argue that Dalton Knecht was a net neutral defender for the first time playing basketball, right? So he's showing that if he commits to something, that he can do it. And I think, you know, wherever he gets drafted, even if it's Detroit, he's not going to be asked to score as much as what he's been used to doing at Northern Colorado and at Tennessee. Now he can commit to learning defense even more. And I think that he fits anywhere. I love him in San Antonio. I love him in Detroit.
Love it. All right, we're going to go to a short break. Omari, when we come back, we are right back to Steven with pick number 9. We'll be the back half of this mock draft, 9 through 16, and Steven will lead us off.
All right, back with segment 3. Steven, you can lead us off with the Memphis Grizzlies.
I'll make it short and sweet. I love Cody Williams. I really considered him higher for Detroit, to be completely honest with you. I mean, if you look at what he's been able to do, albeit low volume, really good three-point shooter this season, good ball handler. Even though he's a little bit lean, he was strong. He was hard to get knocked off the spot. This dude has an absolute nose for the basketball. You know, he's long, very versatile, can play the 2 through 4, in my opinion. Once he gets that NBA weight, he'll be strong enough, I believe, to guard 2s and 3s, maybe even 4s, depending on the matchups that he's against. I think he kind of fits this Memphis Grizzlies archetype in a player. like young, was once thought to believe like a top prospect within this class. He's 6th on my board. I think that he goes to Memphis. There's low expectations, low pressure, but plenty of room for him to blossom at a position that Memphis has needed since even like the Tayshaun Prince days, right? So like get Cody Williams in that program. He's going to get stronger. He's already like really good at basketball, and injuries kind of derailed him a little bit. But when you look at him pre-injury, absolute stud of a basketball player. So I think Memphis would benefit going Cody here.
Let's settle here just a little bit. What are your concerns with Cody Williams? Because YouTube user says, I wish you would have took Cody for Detroit. Would have caused a very fun reaction. I do think there's going to be some Pistons fans that are interested in Cody Williams, though. So you kind of gave the positives. Explain why, I do have him lower on my board, but sure. I want to give you the chance. Like, what downside do you see? What things do you think he has to improve upon to be higher? Why is he not as high with a lot of people?
I think it has to do with visibility, in all honesty. Like, he missed most of the year, right? So, and when we did see him, he came back off of an injury, and it wasn't the best look, but ultimately I like his competitiveness, like wants to boost his stock. We see what visibility does for these prospects. Sure. Like, I mean, so TJ Salon and Pokome Dade are probably benefiting the most out of anybody in the draft process right now, just because their season is longer, right? And it's off kilter for the NCAA. But Cody, I think, the size, in terms of weight is a little bit of a concern. There's the potential that there's a false floor underneath him in terms as a shooter. And I don't know anything else outside of that personally, because when I watch a guy, obviously has great feel for the game, even if you don't believe in him growing as like a lead handler. I think easily second, third creator on a team, like someone who can keep the offense zooming. Just his constantly poking and prodding to get to the basket and converse at a pretty significant rate.
Really nice touch. He has really good touch. Maybe the best touch of the guys we've talked about. So, all right, Omari, you are up at number 10 with the Utah Jazz.
At number 10, I'm going Matas Buzelis.
Okay.
Just more so, I just think he's the best player available at 10. And I have mixed feelings on him as a prospect. I don't know if I believe in the shooting. He believes in the shooting. He was another guy, like I asked about the shooting last week, and he was adamant, like, no, I could shoot. And to his credit, he did shoot the ball pretty well in high school before he had that season with the Ignite, where I don't know if they had anybody shoot the ball well. So I don't know how much of that is on Matas and how much of that is on just his situation. But there's a lot to like about him too, even just outside of the shooting question. Like, I think he is a solid passer, like solid ball handler for his size. His defensive numbers were great. I think he'll be a solid, like, weak side shot blocker. Like, he's a pretty good modern four. I think he gives you a lot of what you want in a modern four. And as long as he can get to like even 35% from three on solid volume, like, I think he's a guy that could be a solid rotation player at the very least for a long time. So at 10, it's just, at that point, I can't let him get any further. I think he has the most upside of anybody else in this draft at that spot.
Steven, can Matas Buzelis shoot? What do you think?
I have Matas 15th on my board, and I think a lot of it, even me having him that high, has to do with, like, at some point you have to believe that the stuff that we heard coming into this season is going to happen. I don't think he can shoot. I watched a lot of his film. And I know that he was kind of billed as like this Hidu Turkoglu coming into this season. Even as a passer, like, I have doubts, right? So he's tall, and he does play like better defense than what I would have than I remembered when I went back and did a dive. I think the defense is better than what I gave him credit for my like initial dive into him go round. So I do agree that he has defensive upside, but the processing, in my opinion, has a ways to go, and the shooting would have to take significant strides, in my opinion, to get to that league average mark. All
right, Wes, you are up at number 11 with the Chicago Bulls.
Yeah, I'm taking my guy. It's Tejan Salon.
No. Why? Why?
Why?
Me taking him at number 12 makes so much more sense. What are we doing? We're supposed to be on the same wave. No, go ahead. What?
I'm sorry. Apparently the Chicago Bulls are jumping over Bryce here with the Thunder and taking Tejan Salon out of France. He's really raw, but I really like him. I like the motor. I like how aggressive he plays on defense. And I like his aggressiveness with his 3-point shots. He takes some really ridiculous ones that, maybe he shouldn't take, but the confidence is there. So I'm buying in on all that at 11 with the Chicago Bulls.
Steven, Tinjon Saloon is a guy we talk about a little bit here because Wes is very high on him. I understand it. Like, I think he's raw. I will say, I text Wes is like, hey, your guy the last 3 games has been absolutely balling. So you're talking about guys taking advantage of opportunities. Pakum Zachary Risachet just had a big game, and then Saloon's last 3 games have been really nice as well. What are your thoughts on Tinjon Saloon? This feels like where he's going to end up on draft night, whether we all agree with it or not. Would you agree with that, kind of based on what you're hearing?
Yeah, man. What people do with the draft is, again, he's in the spotlight right now. He is taking complete advantage. Alex Tuhey and Ben Henshaw at the beginning of the draft cycle were talked about as real NBA draft prospects because the NBL was all we had to watch, and they're not on boards anymore. You know what I mean? But what I think Salon has going for him is that he has the visibility right now, and he has the Shaedon Sharpe kind of mystery prospect allure a little bit. He's got, Ousmane Dieng allure kind of working for him, where these guys that have a lot of questions, but they're so raw and they have all the tools in the world that you would want to see. And at some point, you're going to get to a team that says, we don't like this draft anyway. Let's just swing for the absolute farthest back fences that we can swing to. Bryce, I'll be honest with you, man. Like, I have to dive in on him again because where I am and where a lot of other people are not lining up, right? And YouTube user bringing up the 40% rim finishing. That's true, but TJ Salon could be one of these guys to where my co-host Maxwell says all the time, it's not the entire season that you can judge a prospect for, but it's like these little segments, like these A to B segments where you get to this point here instead of the whole thing and say, well, look at this, like it's trending up now. Like that could be the most important part as opposed to like the entire season.
Yeah, no, he will definitely be interesting. That rim finishing number is one that's gone around a lot. I believe that's just in the half court if you take away his transition. The 3-point percentage isn't great, but he is young. He really looks the part. And here's the thing. I don't think he's at bust potential because the dude plays insanely hard. Like at some way, he's going to find a role on the basketball court because he plays really, really, really hard. So I am up at number 12 with the Thunder, and I've been kind of debating this. The next 3 guys on my board are all smaller players. Carter, McCain, Dillingham, even Collier. And then I get into the bigger, like Filipowski, Deron Holmes. Actually who I'm going to... No, what am I going to do here? I've kind of tried to talk myself into one of these guards before. Like, does Tayson Wallace end up finding himself in the starting lineup for them at some point? And so then they need to replace him in the backup unit or replace an Isaiah Joe. I'm actually just going to go Jared McCain here because I think Jared McCain is an insane floor spacer. And at some point, the Thunder aren't going to be able to keep all of these guys. And so that's with definitely thoughts of Kyle Filipowski. I even considered Tristan DeSilva there for a second. But I will go with Jared McCain just because I feel like Filipowski's one that happens a lot, and I don't want to do that. So Jared McCain, Steven, what are your thoughts on him, the shooter out of Duke?
Yeah, so he's one of these guys where you watch the film and you fall in love with him, and then you get like intel on what NBA teams are talking about him, and it's all over the place. There's people that are like, he's just a shooter. Yeah. Like even some players that I've talked to are like, yeah, he's nice, man, but he's not even the best player coming out of Duke this year, So he's all over the place. I do like him as a shooter for Oklahoma City. I haven't even really given much thought to McCain at OKC. And we think we know how teams are going to draft all the time, and then they like shock the world. I don't know if I would go guard for them, but to me, like another guy who spaces the floor for Shea and J-Dub, like you could do far worse than getting probably one of, if not the best shooters in this draft class, just continuing to open the floor for those two.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is definitely one where they take somebody that's lower on my board. Like this is me staying a little more true to my board because right now I have a bunch of smaller guys, and he's the best floor spacer of those. But again, a Filipowski, even Deron Holmes, Tristan DeSilva, like all of these, Tyler Smith, like all of these guys that kind of play a 4-5 that fits a little bit more of what they need probably makes a little bit more sense. So I definitely understand people questioning that fit. I just think if he's the best player on your board, there's a path over the next couple of years where he becomes valuable because eventually some of these guys are going to move on, sign a big free agency contract, or be part of a bigger deal where they go out and get somebody. So we have 4 more picks. Let's go ahead and get to those. Stephen, you are back up with your last selection with the Sacramento Kings.
Yeah, I think Jaron McCain is a popular pick at this spot, so it's good to see that wasn't there. I probably wasn't going to pick him anyway.
Okay.
Rob Dillingham, I have 7th on my board right now.
Okay, yeah.
And I know that he weighs like next to nothing now. The combine measurements probably hurt him more than almost anybody else because this was a guy that I was seeing like at that Houston pick, a couple weeks ago, and now because he weighs less than 175 pounds, like he's dropping. I think at some point you just got to say, we're going to give this guy cheeseburgers, and continue to let him cook. He's instant offense. He probably has one of the most high potential, like offensive outcomes out of anybody in this class. I mean, this guy can do so much, and he's not a ball hog either. I mean, he and Reed shared the floor a lot. And I think that there's this, there's these 2 same prospects did a lot of the same things, but one is getting praised for playing off ball and being a teammate. The other one's like, oh, this dude's just a bucket getter, right? Like, I think they both do a lot of the same things similarly. But if you look, Rob did it on higher volume. Like, Reed's numbers are fantastic. Like, no one could touch him. But Rob was the guy that did like a lot more of the heavy lifting on this team in terms of offensive output on Kentucky this year, right? So I would go Rob because Monk might be playing somewhere else next season, so you get instant offense off the bench. It's a win to me.
Yeah, maybe Detroit for some people. Hopefully Detroit that Malik Monk is playing. But okay, Omar, because I want to go and get through these 3. Because Stephen, if you want, I know you're already prepared. The Pistons do have a 2nd round pick. It's later in the 2nd round. So before we close this out at the very end, I do want to get a few names that maybe Detroit could find there at 53, undrafted free agent. Just some names. We don't have to get crazy scouts on them, but just some names. So Omari, you're back up with the Blazers at 14. And just a reminder that Wes took Ron Holland for the Blazers at number 7.
I'm going to go Tristan Da Silva.
Okay, like it.
Like this late in the draft. Well, it's not even late in the draft, but at this point in the draft, you want to take a guy that you just know is going to produce, and that's him. He's a great shooter at the 4. He's a good cutter, just good passer. He does everything you want offensively, just about. And then you combine that with him being solid on defense as well. And I just like the idea of taking a guy, like he's 23, so he's one of the older prospects in the draft, but just taking a guy for a young Portland team who can just come in and contribute immediately. I think he's a great fit for now.
Yep. I like that pick a lot. Da Silva's a guy that, you talk about exposure, like he got into the NCAA tournament. People really kind of took notice of all the different things he can do. So Wes, you're up at number 15 with the Miami Heat. I have a feeling where this one will go because there's a guy that just screams Miami Heat to everybody.
Yeah, I was going to say, I'm not going to be unique, especially not with the Heat, because when the Heat are picking, they draft people that scream Miami Heat. So Devin Carter, probably the most Miami Heat basketball player, maybe in the draft, but definitely on the board right now.
Yeah, I love it. Devin Carter to the Heat makes a lot of sense. I'm going to close this out here with the Sixers at number 16. Honestly, we probably shouldn't have even done this because I think everybody believes the Sixers are trading this pick at some point in the offseason. I would take Isaiah Collier here, though, if I was the Sixers. I think he's the best player on my board or close to it. I think he's very talented for being there at 16. And at the end of the day, if they did keep it, I think they could use a backup point guard like Collier to play behind Tyrese Maxey. So that is our rundown just real quick here. And then Stephen will ask for some 2nd round prospects Pistons fans should get to know. Hawks take Alex Sarr, Wizards Donovan Clingan, Rockets Zachary Risache, Spurs Nikola Topic. Those guys off the board for the Detroit Pistons, and they take Steph Castle. And then we finish off with the Hornets, Reed Shepherd, Blazers, Ron Holland, Spurs, Dalton Connect, Grizzlies, Cody Williams, Jazz, Matas Buzelis, Bulls, Tinjon Saloon, Thunder, Jared McCain, Kings, Rob Dillingham, Blazers, Tristan Da Silva, Heat, Devin Carter, Sixers, Isaiah Collier. Real quick, Stephen, who's the next 2-3 players you have? Who's your best available on your board after those 16 are gone?
After those 16 are gone, I like Jalen Tyson a lot. I like Kyle Filipowski a lot. I like Tyler Smith is kind of in that range. Hunter Silas, I got to give him a shout out to.
Sure.
Hunter.
Okay, very good. All right, let's talk 2nd round. Pistons are 53, something like that. So into the 2nd round with only 58 picks. Undrafted free agents. Give us a few names and a couple sentences on a few different guys that maybe if the Detroit is able to land these guys, we're one of them that they could kind of get excited about?
I got to say AJ Mitchell, creative ball handler who I think probably benefits the least out of the guard depth in this class, because I think in most other drafts, like, this guy would be much higher on my board. He's just a lot of mouths to compete with, but great shooter, great ball handler, gets downhill. I think he's a okay one position defender. I would say too, I like Isaiah Crawford a great deal, coming out of Louisiana Tech. Versatile do-it-all guy who can dribble, pass, shoot, and defends his absolute tail off. 6'6", 220-ish pounds. Shot over 40% for 2 seasons and at like 39% the year before. A very unheralded, underrated guy. Multiple injuries in his young basketball career, but he's strung along some really strong consecutive good playing years. Really like him a lot. I think Enrique Freeman probably helped his draft stock out the most. I think that if I could draft this guy in the second round, like, you bring a guy like him in your program.
I've heard the intel is crazy on Enrique Freeman.
The student body president
like,
of his high school, you know, and like went to Akron on an academic scholarship.
Yeah, like insane intel about who this kid is. So
yeah, you want to bring a guy like that in. I think a little bit lower on my board that people might like. I've heard Pell Larson is a guy that could have some intrigue there. You know, Tristan Newton is a little bit later down my board. I like Jalen Williams out of Auburn a little bit too, potentially for that spot. Jamal Shed, another guy. I like Quentin Post out of Boston College.
Okay, so that's what I was gonna ask. If you didn't bring him up, I was gonna ask, do you have a big man that could space the floor? Because I think even if it's a little more one-dimensional without the defense, that's something this Pistons team could use. Post is a guy I've pinpointed, whether it's at 53 or as an undrafted free agent. I would love to see the Pistons bring in, because he's an older dude, he's huge, and he can shoot the ball. So do you like Post as a potential late second undrafted free agent? And is there another big in a similar mold that maybe could be in that range?
I mean, I have Quentin Post 52nd on my board ahead of like guys that I mentioned earlier. So I think that he could be a good fit there. I actually interviewed him. He's a great young man, a good head on his shoulders, like actually worked out the NBA draft the year prior to. So a guy that NBA teams already kind of know. So I like him a lot. And then I don't know how you feel about Naquan Tomlin. I think that he's like funky enough and he can like dribble, pass, shoot.
Yeah.
And is a high hustle guy that's tail end who I think could be there. But as far as like floor stretching bigs, if I go a little bit further down my board, I mean, I have to go ways down to before I start getting to any more like floor spacing big men that I would feel comfortable drafting.
Perfect. All right, Stephen, we're going to let you go. We're all going to go watch this game 1 of the Eastern Conference Finals. It's a close enough game right now. Celtics continue to go on some runs, and then Indiana fights back. So I think we'll all get a great, second half of the second quarter and all of the second half. Let everybody know where they can find you, Twitter, where your content's at, all of that, all of the great stuff you and No Ceilings are doing.
Well, Bryce, Omari, and Wes, I appreciate y'all so much for having me. Appreciate the invite to come back on the show. It means a lot. You guys do tremendous work. So sharing a platform with you guys is just great. For people who want to follow me on Twitter, I still call it Twitter. It's at Stephen G Hoops. For people who want to follow draft content, NoCeilingsNBA.com. We have articles there linked to our podcast, which is up on YouTube, No Ceilings NBA. We have all the other socials as well. I'm just most active on Twitter. And we're coming up on draft season. So if you want to get kind of acclimated in on the draft, I know Bryce does a fantastic job of keeping everybody covered. But, would love to, extend the fans that we have on the No Ceilings universe as well. But thank you all so much for having me on. And, looking forward to seeing what Detroit does, man.
Yeah, it's going to be exciting. So, Wes, always good to get your beautiful face on here. Make sure you guys are checking out the Pin Down over in the Detroit Bad Boys YouTube. And Omari, take it away, my guy.
Stephen, always great having you on, man. You are on the short list of people we've now had on multiple times. So I have to put your name up on the plaque we have. All right, so I'll close this out. Big thanks to our editor, Robin Chan, our editor-in-chief, Nicole Avery Nichols, and our sports editor, Kirkland Crawford. And big shout out to Wes, who will be joining us again soon on the pod, hopefully, and we'll talk to you all next week.